back to the test. So
the test.
The test that nobody can you can pass this test, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the. So I wanna lead in a little bit with a conversation I had with one of our students here recently, which was kind of a gut punch to me because we're this far into the program, and this is coming up, and I'm sure I went cross-eyed for a minute, and then hit myself in the side of the head.
This
and
is non-punitive. It's parental.
So, but the conversation was, I was told not to read my protocols. I was not, I was told not to look at protocols because that's not what registry wants. Now, after my brain scramble and I recovered from that, my question to the student was, let me guess, whomever is coaching you, whoever is telling you this, is my age or older. And he's like, yeah, how'd you know that? I said, because we were taught, and we've already talked about it.
You asked them the last time they took this
we
test.
We were taught to pass this test,
Yeah.
right? Now, we're kind of sitting here talking about it from a pretty luxurious perspective because we like you believe that we should be able to pass the test, right? And and again, early on, I felt it was my responsibility to my student to be able to pass the same test. So early on I took it to be a legitimate instructor in my mind, right?
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't a requirement,
Yeah.
right? I should be able to pass this test. Then, as I got older, it just became laziness. I would
didn't want to keep a spreadsheet.
Well, I mean, I look at it from this perspective at this point. Yes, I still have that to offer my student, right? And that is important, and I don't want to diminish that. But on the flip side of that, from the laziness perspective, 2 hours of my life, once every three years, I do state, not national registry, but it's the same test. $150, I'm done.
Not anymore.
It's like $180.
Yeah, they raise the prices. But it's a one. I would spend that much time, that much money collecting CE, my time to collate all that.
Yes.
So as I get older, it's more laziness. But nevertheless, we all have taken this test in recent history, and and what I'm getting at here is I've never in my entire career recertified by CE in almost 30 years now. It's always been taking the test, and I can say definitively that the test that we are giving to these students now is the fairest assessment, right? So that that old school guy was just like I, had a beat in my head. Here's the box you live in, and you got to, you have to know this, this box, test way, right? This is going to, make or break you. That's gone, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a hard concept for people to get out of their heads. It is concepts now.
Yes.
It is.
Well, the curriculum's even the fairest it's ever been. So, I mean, look at the curriculum, right?
Yes.
There are some drugs and there are some things we have to teach because, to your earlier point, we don't know where you're going, right? And just because that's what we do in Northeast Ohio, that's not what everybody else is going to do everywhere else, and we don't know where you're going to go, and it is National Registry at that, right?
Yes.
But I just open a textbook anymore and see how many references to local, state protocols and guidelines. So there really is no book way, street way
like there used to be,
anymore.
Right? That used to be the way.
Yeah.
It was like,
correct.
You have to read the book, you have to do the book way. Don't think about this, because when you get out, then we're going to teach you the street way. Right?
Just because
that's how it was when I went to school.
is something different doesn't mean it's not still in the same class of medications.
Let's talk about meds and that test. One of my observations over the years is like dopamine. Like I have dopamine beat in my head, right? I can spout off to this day, how to mix, how to drip, do dopamine.
Lidocaine.
And I had and the clock, and I had to know all that math and stuff. And then I watched the math kind of go away, and then not that med math isn't important. That's not my message. I'm just saying it's currently not reflected on the test. Because it's going to be different based on
where
the
you're
drug
working.
where you're working, the drug you use, the concentration, all this, all that. And then that pendulum is so to the point where even dosages started going away. So now we were talking more about individual drugs. So, it's like, which of these 4 drugs is the most appropriate for this scenario, right?
How that drug works.
The next evolution and this is gratifying for me because it's always been something I've harped on. I'm sure registry, listen to what Scott said, but but classes of drugs have always been important to me, right? If you understand what the class of drug, then once you put those drugs in said class, you have a general understanding of what properties this class of medications is going to bring. Whether I hand you this drug, this drug, this drug in the same class, you have a general concept of how it's going to behave.
Yeah.
We're now seeing that pendulum continue to swing to drug classes. It's not just which of these medications, a sympathomimetic, a benzodiazepine, which of these would be most appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Because let's just look in our own local protocol. We've got 3 different benzodiazepines that are written for, right?
Yeah.
Versed, Valium, and Ativan, right? When each are used and when we have access to it, that's for another time. But again, one class, I have lots to choose from, but that there's that drug class part of that.
Yep.
Why don't you speak a little bit to the format changes?
Yeah.
Of the actual questions themselves.
So, and this goes back to the psychological piece of the program because the format is different. And I'll say from my most recent experience, one of the most frustrating things was just orientation of the format of the test. And being a newer style test, everything hasn't caught up to that, right? So when you go to the test, they give you a tutorial of the test. Everybody clicks through that tutorial. Probably beneficial when you're taking a test that rides on your certification that you pay attention to the tutorial, the test, right? So there are a couple different style of questions. There are scenario style questions, which first test what are you thinking en route to the scene? Are you concerned about weather? Are you concerned about distance? Are you concerned about access to the patient? And then you're on the scene and it's asking you about how you're assessing, evaluating, and treating that patient. And then your post scene, which is basically justification of why you did in the previous steps. One of the things you have to pay attention to there is the scenes are changing and the questions are changing, but it doesn't tell you use this scenario for questions 27 through 30, right?
Not like an ACLS test would.
Yeah,
Yep.
You have to pay attention to 2 sides of the screen as they're simultaneously changing and you're getting new information.
Like every scene, it
like
evolves.
every scene, because this test is in part testing both your psychomotor and your knowledge component. So you do have that, and then there's even, it's something little and stupid, but there's a little bar in the center that you can drag to move from one side to the other. One of the recent things when I was tutoring students is they're like, why can I never see the whole strip? This is another great example for why you go take the test, right? I go take the test and I'm playing with it and I'm like, well you can't see the strip because you didn't pay attention to the tutorial where you can't slide that across and then you can see the whole strip, right? But that's a little component that when you're already nervous about taking a test, that can make or break it for you right there.
Sure.
From there, then they change to select multiple questions. Now, to your point in fairness, they always tell you how many. They're not leaving it open, select all that apply. It says select 2 or select 3. Can almost be worse, right? Sure. Because all of them can be appropriate, but order of importance, what comes first. There's ordering questions where you have to order stuff in a scenario. An example, pacing, right? What are your steps of pacing, putting the pad, setting the rate, setting the milliamps, things like that. There's charts where you have to say what's going to apply to particular scenarios or providers or entities. And then there's your good old multiple choice questions. Yep. So there's a large variety, but what I think it takes out of it is that quintessential I'm a nervous test taker situation, because it's just application of the information. You either know it or you don't, and you're just applying it in those scenarios.
I think your point there, too, is overlooked, is I'm going to go back to the beginning of what you started with. read the directions. And I know
Yes.
that sounds really dumb, but I agree with you because we give tests at our site for, not for National Registry, but for on the state side of things. And there's the first screen. You should read that tutorial because as soon as it happens, it never fails. Never fails. Somebody's 3 questions in.
How do I use this? Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
And it's like, if
Did
you
you
would
read
have
the
taken,
It
tutorial?
even
because the
tells
tutorial
you.
typically, and correct
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong, the tutorial does not take away from your time of
No.
the actual
No.
test.
And it actually,
You-
that's the first page of the tutorial. It says this does not count towards your time of the test. Pay attention,
Yeah.
take your time in this tutorial. And if you read it, you would take your time.
Yeah.
But I mean, it even explains to you, you can take the questions away in the corner. So if that's something that bothers you to see
Yes.
what question you're on, you can take it away. It tells you how to bring it back. It tells you how if you hit a problem in the test, you can go down to the corner and there's a help feature and it'll explain to you again the tutorial and how to utilize the test. The calculator, which you don't need anymore, but that's there also. But it explains all those little features that aren't the things you want to be focusing on, but also feeding back to the field. And I know from our previous time, this always came big to us, is it's the things you don't want to be thinking about when you're in the back of an ambulance, right? I shouldn't be having to think about where's my airway equipment in the truck. I should just be able to grab and know where my airway equipment is in the truck. But that same concept, and that is how they're applying. Everybody's like, well, how are they applying the skills portion of that? That's how they're applying it, is how you're paying attention and focusing and interacting with the information, not just taking a test.
The other piece of the testing that I think continually comes up is the adaptability of the test, and then you're just not getting basically a flashcard flop down in front of you. At every one is weighted, and the computer adapts to.
It's called a CAT test.
But
Computer
I
adaptive
also,
testing.
but to your point, I also think this is the fairest it's ever been. So it used to be that you took the test and you either met the criteria or you were not going to
Correct.
be able to meet the criteria, and the test shut off.
Correct.
And that was incredibly scary
Sure.
when you're taking a test and it shuts off at 70 questions, and that either means you did awful or fantastic.
Amazing, yeah.
But you have no
Nothing
idea.
in between,
You have no
right?
idea, right? Now the test, and they have changed this with the EMT test as well, but to the paramedic test specifically, it's a 110 question minimum. Now you still can get up to the 150 questions, but everybody, no matter how you're doing, is taking 110 questions, and 20 of those are unscored questions. The important thing to remember there that I notice with students taking the test, I keep going back to the psychological component,
Right.
but there will be stuff you have no idea what it looks
I
like.
wanted to talk about that. Yep.
And when I was just taking it, there were things I went and looked up afterwards, one of which I cannot find anywhere. I don't even know if it exists,
If it
to be
exists, right,
quite
yeah,
honest.
right.
I can only hope and assume that was an unscored question, right? But the point of that statement is you cannot let that get you bent out of shape. And it's just like the calls in reality, right? In a shift, I may have to run 8, 10, 15, depends on where you're working, or maybe only 3 calls in a shift, right? But the point is, I can't carry patient number 1 over to patient number 2 or patient number 4, right? And you've got to take the test in the same manner. You cannot take what you were stressed out about on the last question
Correct.
and carry it over the next question, or you're not going to do well, right?
Plus, that can't be a stopping point for you, right? That's
No.
like if it is just something obscene, and I'm like, I don't know what the answer is, right? Take your best guess, but that can't be a hard stop. No different than in the back of the ambulance, like, well, I've never seen this before, so I just don't know what to do,
And
right?
the test doesn't build, the test doesn't structure. I mean, it's a random delivery.
It's a random offering, right?
Yeah, although there's some
it's-
theory behind the randomization.
Well, it's keeping track,
Yeah,
right? It's just
there's-
offering it to you in a
Correct.
mixed manner, and that was the kind of the point I wanted to make about. That's a great example, that there's always things. Having taken it so many times, I'm just like, see, I've no idea. I've never seen those words before in my life, and what you have to understand is. To figure out, where somebody averages out, you have to have a high and a low, right? This is pretty simple understanding. So, likewise, it's probably not going to ask you what is an OPA. if it's just ask you, a question about, doing a surgical cricothyrotomy and a retrograde intubation or something like that.
Yeah.
If you can answer these, these top tier things, it's probably you're going to get some of the low ones, you're going to get some of the high ones. If you get a bunch of others, it's probably just trying to figure you out where you fall on, where your average falls, right?
Yeah.
So I tell people, don't be worried when you get that. My last one, I got just obliterated with neurological syndromes that, again, never have heard about any. I'm like, I don't know if I should even know this. Okay, see, it is.
One of my times was Parkinson's. I had I don't know how many questions about Parkinson's
you know what? I think
patients,
I had 2 or 3.
and I was like, this was
yeah,
like
we know some broad brushstroke stuff
Yeah.
about it, but
So it just you can't hyper focus on that.
100%.
But you also can't hyper focus on the information given to you by people that have taken the test
Yeah.
because
You probably won't
you
see the same
can't
test.
figure out. You're not gonna figure out how to beat the test
No.
in I took it and I saw repetitive questions, so I failed. Or I took it and I got
That
70
doesn't mean
questions, so I
anything. Yep.
passed. It doesn't mean anything. Focus on the time in the program on understanding the why. Focus on understanding the why, and then you'll make it through the test.
You can work the test.
Point of the information is understanding these psychological components so you can be aware as you get through. I mean, for myself, I too don't like the countdown timer on how many questions are left. I knew it was a 110 minimum question. I looked up at like 80 questions and I wanted to melt down because I was I don't take 110 question tests all the time anymore. I was done.
Yeah.
But I had to go, don't just start clicking,
USA.
just read the
Yeah.
question and move on, right? It'll
Yeah.
be over soon. So it's recognition so that you can make sure you manage that appropriately when you go in. And the whole chew gum when you go, so you have the same gum flavor or whatever, the testing centers aren't going to allow that, so don't do that either.
I will only add one thing. The last time I took it,
Oh, don't say it.
the last time I took it, in my opinion, I was that person where they're like, "Do you want earplugs?"
Oh, okay.
And I was
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
"No."
I thought you were going to say
I
took
was
the
like,
shot in the
I was-
pilot.
I was
no,
waiting for a
no,
shot in the
no, no,
parking
no.
lot,
I
yeah.
was like, "No, I don't want earplugs." And then I sat down, and the person in the cubicle next to me was doing a typing exam. And I was like, if I could reach through that cubicle, I was like, yep, I was that guy. I was like, I should have listened. I literally said, I raised my hand. I didn't even start yet. I started to read the little tutorial thing, and I raised my hand, and she came back. I was like, I will take 2 sets of earplugs. She was like, okay. I'm like,
For all 4 of my ear
going like
canals.
this because it's like, and it's like they know too. There's no way to cheat or anything
Yeah.
like that. But I'm like, whenever that person's done, if you could tell me what's left on their timer, I would greatly appreciate that. Like, I just want to. I'm like,
Well,
and
but this brings up a great point because you're taking it so, and this also goes to your point on EMT doesn't necessarily prepare you for all the things of medics because EMT can now take this test at home.
Yeah.
That was the
So,
question I was going to ask you. There's
paramedics
rumor that you
cannot.
can do it as a
No.
paramedic at home too, and I wanted to smash that. So thanks for bringing that up.
You cannot yet. I don't know if that's coming. I haven't heard any. I could only assume that would come eventually, but I'll tell you that comes with its own blessing and curse to begin with because you have to be in a room that's not going to be interrupted. You have to have a 360-degree camera. You have to make sure that you have stable internet connection. You drop something and you try and pick it up or you forget to shut your phone off and it vibrates in the middle, it's an automatic fail and then you have to appeal. So it's not like in a testing center where you can click on the keys and they're like, quiet down, please, right?
Yeah.
You don't get that fair warning. But EMTs can take it at home or they can take it at a testing site. Paramedics still presently have to take it at a testing site. So you also have to prepare for that. Some you're going to be in a cubicle. Some you might even get your own room. Some you might be sitting watching a high school kid take his math test over here, But you have to be ready for whatever that environment may be. And it may not be a stale, comfortable, stark room.
After the earplugs, it was a lot better. I was just like, I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? It's just like you sit down I have to, and that's just me knowing myself. Like for a test, I'm not a great test taker. I'm not going to be super fast, but I know what I need to do well on the test. And I was just like,
Well, that's just it.
I need that background noise.
So do I.
Yeah, me
I
too.
wish they would blast music,
yeah, but like
honestly.
the weird thing is like if it's not a test to read or do other thing or like write a paper, I love the background.
Sure,
noise.
right. That's weird.
Yeah, like
isn't
I'll
it?
have music on.
It's
and
so,
it'll be like,
yeah.
you know,
I'm
in
one
other
of 12
classes in
kids
college.
growing up.
Yeah.
I need background noise, or
Yeah.
I get scared.
Well, that's your comfort. That's your comfort level. Yeah, that's your zone. Yeah.
But for me, for testing, it's not. So
but
you just have to be aware.
No, know where you're going in advance.
Yeah.
Don't guess the day of and get lost, and then because they're not gonna give you extra time if you show up late for the test. You get a time. Be early for your test. Don't do the shot in the parking lot. Don't do that. I know people have said that. It'll calm your nerves. I'll go get hammered. No, don't do that, because you can't do that at work either.
Yeah.
Calm down.
Don't take the test.
Don't overdose your ADD medicine or whatever it is you got to do. Don't do it.
Don't look at flashcards in the parking lot before you walk
Don't
in.
study the night before.
If you don't know it, you don't know it.
Yeah, if you're cram studying and then going early,
You need to get
for,
good.
for
you need
the
to rest.
for the student.
For
that
the
is.
student,
For the
yes.
student, that is. Yeah. I know what I don't know, and I literally sit out in the parking lot and I reread. It's OB stuff. I can't keep. I can't keep.
You didn't do your clinical time.
That's right, because that I actually did do, but I know, like just like you, and I know that's I'm not strong there, and I take my ancient textbook.
Scoring
I take my
and,
It's just not top of mind for me. I just reread it, refresh myself, bang.
you get a
those things I knew, and boom, I
whiteboard
go.
and a dry erase marker.
Yes.
Do not start filling that out until you hit start, because I messed up that the one time. I sat down and I started filling out some things, and then I went to hit, and they had to come out and wipe it all down.
Oh,
you got to hit start first. It's like, and then to be honest with you, that was all it took, because then I was like, I don't even need it. Just test. But
I just wrote it down. I'm good.
the tutorial at the beginning, a lot of times, like you said, if you take that calms you down. That gets you into the test mode. That clears your head. It's like, all right, breathe. You got this. And don't take the test. You're not taking the entire test. Take it one question at a time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you walk in taking a test, you're going to be scared. You're going to get anxiety. You're not doing the whole test at once.
Nope.
The one thing that Karen says that sticks with all the students is, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time.
Yeah.
Going back to that, I liked when you brought up some of the things that you review. Although we say there's not book versus reality, there's not the test versus reality. The one thing I will say is you do still have to memorize things like GCS, APGAR scoring, burn percentages, right? There are some of those things that maybe the paramedics working in the field are used to having already built into their protocol, or have on a cheat sheet on the side of the squad or whatever.
Those are just free questions at registry, though, because you're going to get questions on a
GCS you have
scale,
to still
burn
know
scale.
some of those.
Yeah.
So don't get too caught up in the, it's not book versus reality. You do still have to know a lot of those general concepts. There is some straight memorization application questions.
If you walk in not knowing what sample history is, or decap BTLS, or you need to know that stuff. You really do.
Yep.
I'd argue that you guys just said everything that was covered in base EMT school. So all of the statements
Should be already known.
It should.
Right. Those were EMT level questions.
But also remember that a lot of the questions are EMT related questions. I mean, in fairness, if you put a pretty decent test taking EMT student into the test,
minus cardiology, they're going to be fine.
Yeah, most of the application, I don't know that they would pass the test, right? But if you could just see answer for answer on some of those, I mean, a lot of them are literally just
pretty
basic
close,
application.
You kind of prefaced that the psychomotor was going away, and we didn't matter which way we did this, it was going to be wrong. So we're going to talk back. We already gave the replacement for that, which is this new test with developing scenarios and more competency based stuff, and more elaborate, right? So how do we still prove psychomotor in addition to the change in the actual taking of test, and then where does virtual reality, simulation, all that play into?
So what they said is now it's on the burden of the state to determine what they want to do from a psychomotor exam. Basically here in Ohio, nothing changed. We already had to give a state final psychomotor. The only thing we did to change that is I actually liked the way the previous registry, I thought that was the fairest psychomotor exam there was. It just really was hard from a operational standpoint, because now you have 30 plus paramedic
Sure.
students, and you have to have a bazillion stations, and you have the integrated out of hospital that's 20 minutes no matter how long you're doing it,
And a
times those
patient
40
in there.
paces.
And so,
Yeah. So the equipment and the people and the resources. So we just took that and spread it out. Instead of being one day, we're just doing it over several days, whatever works for that individual program, the hours, the number of students, how many people we can get in, so on and so forth. So they're still going through that same component, number one. You're supposed to prove it through their competencies and the documentation of both their skills days in the program, and with all of the requirements they have to meet for their clinical time. Because there's some things they have to do in clinical time. There's some things that can be simulated, which then leads into your simulation piece. So we here specifically have started doing some virtual reality. Now we're just getting introduced to it. We're just starting to play with it. We're not requiring it from any perspective. But I do have a grand plan that I hope to have it be a testing component in the future. The reason I have liked a lot of this development is because we were talking about the instructors earlier and the individual instructor. Even all of us in this room, we could put a scenario in front of us and we can say, we're going to grade these students today, and these are the key points I want to focus on. And we're all going to agree. And then we're going to go in individual rooms and we're going to start touching individual students, and we're all going to nitpick on something different, and we're going to test differently. So now you take that out of it, and now I have a virtual program where I have a live virtual patient in front of me, and those same things that we agreed on, we put into the program. That is a computer that is going to regurgitate the information, right? And they're going to get it delivered exactly the same way. Well, depending on how they present the information, right? But they're going to get the same responses back. They're going to get delivered the same information for what they put into it, and they're going to be graded on the exact same criteria. Flip that to the EMT. Now, if we start this in the EMT program, I can use this particular program to drive their learning. So now I can say you're learning patient assessment, okay? I can't let you make any bad habits because now this program won't even let you ask a sample history until you checked ABCs, right? So when I'm teaching the early learner, I don't even let you start making bad habits.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean you won't develop some intrinsically, because we're humans and we're going to, but I'm setting a way better stage originally and taking that piece out of it, that you have to follow the systematic step. I'm not going to let you get out of the systematic step. You're graded on the systematic step. You can still see the information. It's better than a plastic mannequin in front of them. Right. It's still a patient that sits up and moans and groans and is sweaty and gross. And, you know, you have to actually look at them and see what's there, and not just, we've all seen the student that sits across from you and they're like, I'm checking your pupils now. And you're like, you are? Yes. I'm taking your blood pressure. You are? Yes, right. So you're actually having to put in that input and get information that I think is just, there's been a lot of studies on how that does for the educational perspective. But that's an exciting piece of the landscape that I think is really going to make testing, again, more fair. Yeah. But challenging.
Repeatable and objective. That's going to be huge. And I think you're spot on with the early learner, right? With that initial, clearly there's value to it in the paramedic space as well. But
having a good foundation to build.
No, that's not letting them get into bad habits. That's a spectacular point, actually. So,
where do you see AI evolving with the programs?
AI has been a challenge in this current educational space because it's been so developing and the access component is there, but to the point of understanding study tools and techniques, the understanding of utilization and usage is the problem. And I think all of us can say we're proponents of AI in this room. I use AI on probably a daily basis. You're using it right now.
I'm literally, these show notes, but this is gonna, dovetailing with what you're about to say. These show notes were written basically from AI. We put a couple of our own notes.
Put them in, and so the challenge is using AI to give you an inappropriate advantage is still just as inappropriate as like if you went to Quizlet and posted something and asked for an answer. That's still a problem. Now the flip side of that is our learning programs are using AI to catch you doing that. So if you post a screenshot of a picture from a virtual test, they will find it, and then your name's in the background of that picture, right? And that's a problem. So it's being used in a twofold capacity on both sides of the scale. If you use it appropriately, it can be a phenomenal tool. They even have medical driven AI components that, like, you put in an MPI number and it searches a bunch of resources, but that's what it does. It searches a bunch of resources like if you were typing something in Google. But instead of clicking on each individual web page to read the information,
it summarizes
it's going to summarize and compile it, right? But it doesn't get rid of the need to still do original work. It doesn't get rid of the need to still appropriate cite sources. It doesn't get rid of the need to still understand information. And this is becoming really important, from the entrance of hybrid education courses. I mean, we've been doing hybrid EMT courses for a while now, and one of my biggest fears every hybrid class is, are my students being honest, right? And so you have to rely on a lot of that information to make sure that those resources are being utilized. And yes, there's secure testing stuff, but everything's going to have a limitation. If you want to circumvent the system, you're going to circumvent the system. It's whether you get caught or not. But being fair and honest with yourself, knowing that you should be using that as like a grammar resource or a spell check or a ordering component, right? So it can be a really valuable tool as long as it's utilized appropriately.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about, we go back to the student handbook, and there is an academic honesty pledge. The student signs to that, and I mean, we have to uphold to that. Like you said, I use it too. I use it to help write, preps for tests that I'm giving or something, and it's been a great tool.
At the end of the day, I think we all have to think, and there needs to be a lot of weight on the fact, once you get out of this program, no matter where you go, no matter which medical path you choose to take, no matter which one of the pathways we decide we're dealing with, no matter whether we take more towards fire or EMS, we're still dealing with people's lives. We're in a public service industry, no matter where we're going, and somebody's lives is going to be in our care at some point in time. And we need to think, if our whole educational career was an open book to that patient's loved one, is that a book they would want to read? Or would they want to kick us out of the house right away, right? I know when I did my skills in paramedic school, they didn't grade our skill sheets. They either said, I would trust you to take care of my family member, or you need to work on that, right? And if you didn't pass the bar of, I would work with you in the field, or I would let you take care of my family member, you did it again. And that was something that always really stuck with me. Was it the most fair way to grade things? No, it wasn't, right? But
was it humbling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you got that, you were like, oh my gosh, you let me take care of your mother.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, you're like, oh boy,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not going to get hired anywhere.
Right.
So I just think that's something really that gets kind of undervalued. You get caught up in the minutia of the class, and I need to pass and I need to understand. But at the end of the day, what does that really mean once you're out in the field? And I think that's important.
Yeah.
Time between transition from EMT to paramedic, right? And we were talking off camera here a little bit ago, and I certainly came from, my pathway by no design was, I practiced as an EMT for a period of time, and then I became at the time was intermediate EMT, now advanced EMT. I became an intermediate EMT for a period of time, and then I went to paramedic school. And that was incredibly successful for me, so it hard set my mind of, this is the way everybody should do it, because when I got to paramedic school, all I had to learn was paramedic stuff. I didn't have to learn basic stuff. I didn't have to learn starting IVs, some basic drugs, some basic cardiology. I had that foundation already. It's different today. What are our thoughts?
I'll tell you, up until
all around
2 years ago,
regarding
until 2 years ago, I was dead set on, if anybody asked me, I said practice as a basic EMT for at least a year before considering paramedic class, and that shifted for me.
Why is that shift?
I think that shifted mostly because now that I've been teaching for as long as I have now, the type of student we're seeing is more than capable of going directly to paramedic school and being an outstanding paramedic in the field. And I think that's probably because of the way that we've changed our curriculum.
We've changed the way we deliver
and the way that we're teaching.
And it's the individual student too, right? And I get this question all the time as, should I go straight from one to the other? Should I go to a hospital versus a college? I was told when I went in that you should only go to a hospital-based program. I didn't listen. I went to a college-based program, right? And but there was a mentality difference there, and it depends on the individual. You're going to get out of it whatever you put into it, and you may get a little more information and help and resources along the way depending on where you go. But a successful provider can go to any style program, can do it in any path, right? But you need to know you as an individual. Are you a good student? Do you need more time? Are you more of a hands-on person? If you're more of a hands-on person, then you're probably better to take that year, or at least make sure you're working somewhere that's going to support you while you're going through paramedic school. And I think that's part of it. Like, I went to EMT school and then fire school, and I didn't get hired on somewhere until I was out of fire school. And they were like, go right away because you have us to support you through the program, right? And that was a big help in going through that because of the mentorship piece. If you don't have that, or you're not a good student, then you maybe need to look back at, let me get hired somewhere first, and then I'll see if I can go somewhere from there. So it's all individualized.
Yeah. But I think that my mindset personally has changed. That it's absolutely possible, and I would never discourage anybody from doing it unless I knew them personally and said, you need more time.
We've seen plenty of successful students. So I actually just had a student ask me this. So we have a program that is ending at the start of our AMP for paramedic. And the student I don't have a ton of time with, and they were asking me, do you think this makes sense? I want to go straight into it. I want to get it done. The student's working on a department somewhere, being sponsored. First thing I did was I talked to him about the stuff. I said, but let me look into a couple things. And, if this is something you're really serious about, come back and talk to me, right? Test number one. Because if you really want to do it, you're going to come back and talk to me. Test number two was I went to the grade book, right? Where are your grades? Because if you're that barely passing student, you're probably not the one, right? So I look, and the student is not a barely passing student, is closer at the top of the class, right? I talk to the instructor. Are they turning in their homework in time? Are they asking good questions in class? Those are the things that are making a big difference. And then I look at that and I'm like, okay, you know what? Yep. This makes a lot of sense to you. Go back and
reasonable
look.
Risk, yeah. And the other thing that, and again, I still think it makes a lot of sense. Again, by no design, it was the way my personal experience fell, but everybody has this option, which is, as you're choosing where to go for paramedic school, go sit in on a few classes.
Yeah.
Right?
Anytime.
Go to different, right, and even within our own organization. I mean, when we went down and we did the podcast at our sister program, the culture at our sister program is different than the culture at our program at Geauga. It's just different. It's not, any better or worse. You can go feel that out. Building on does it need to be a hospital program versus a community college program, or, however. If anybody wants you that bad to come into their program, they'll let you sit through a couple of classes, and that was what I had.
Always been an open invitation.
It's what I had the luxury of doing. When I went to paramedic school, I had some recommendations for people I trusted. I looked at how they practice. These are really high functioning people. I probably want to go where they went. I did wind up going there, but I did poke around at a couple other. And then when I went out there, it's like, this was night and day difference. I felt comfortable there. This is where I wanted to be. And it was in Sandusky. And I lived at the time, I lived in Brunswick. And, it was an hour and 10 minutes away.
You also have to think about what's your attention span, right? Because if you can't, Geauga's a great example. That's a more accelerated program, but you're sitting there for hours of the day. If you can't sit there for hours of the day, you need to pick somewhere different. You should spread that out, right? Yeah. Or even how you're learning. Some places will do accelerated programs that do like 5 days in a row, okay? Well, if you're not the type of person that doesn't need to open a book to take a test, that's probably not the place for you, because you're going to need to study and develop So it really still leads back to that you have to have your personal understanding of your study habits to be able to choose what is going to work best for you. And you really should be asking those questions before you go to a program instead of, we see it time and time again, the student gets in the program and they're like, this style doesn't work for me, which leads to hybrid education. We've started offering hybrid education. No, we're not doing it right now for the paramedics, is the common thing that I get asked. We're only doing it for EMT programs right now and advanced programs we've started doing. But that's a different type of student because the ownership is all on you.
All on you, exactly.
And then we're just here to help fill in the blanks and make sure you stay on track and navigate you through the material. So you really have to know before you choose where you're going what type of student you are. And if you don't, ask somebody to assess you. Like that. I mean, that's, we can ask you a couple questions and determine, that's probably for you or that's not, as long as you are honest about your abilities.
I don't know why it is, though, because for 5 years now, I've been asked quite a bit, like, hey, I want to go to your program. I want to go to UH Geauga's program. Okay, come sit through a class.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen 2 students who have decided to come and actually observe for a couple hours and be like, okay, this works for me. Why not more? I don't get that, I guess, because I would want to. Offered like, hey, come sit through the class once. Okay.
It's a lack of planning. I mean, we see a lot of enrollment just weeks before classes open up, and so that's then when you do that, you're not really. And it used to be that a lot of programs you had to interview, right? So you filled out the application, you were chosen from a list of
they're blasting
300, and then you had to go in and you had to sit down with a group and you had to say why you wanted to be there, right? That shift started happening where time, resources, need for people, that interviewing process doesn't happen anymore. You just sign a piece of paper, maybe pay $35, and then you show up for day one of the class.
Yeah. I'd like to think that partially, though, something that sets us aside is that A&P course, and that is part of your interview for the class. Sure. If you're not going to make it, you're going to find out very quickly that you're not going to make it in A&P.
Well, I mean, look, year over year since we've been doing that, A&P enrollment versus what winds up in the class, right?
Yeah.
It shakes a lot of people out.
It does.
I like that two-part.
It's also nice for the student too, because you're not investing all the money and all the resource and the time for the class and then getting into it and realizing it doesn't work versus taking a 6-week course and being like, oh, this is not EMT school, and maybe this is not for me.
Yeah. This has been absolutely fabulous, and I think this went exactly where I figured we would go with this, and this has been great. So appreciate you coming on, and
register early if you're going to do it, because they fill up quick at the end, and then we always lose people. So register early.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we appreciate you watching or listening, and we'll catch you next time.